Curious Lloyd.
Everybody loves a good old horror story because they actually make you feel somewhat safe, as you can scare yourself with movies about ghosts specifically because nobody you know has ever been killed by one. But in this video, I shall talk about these 5 unsolved crimes which are pretty creepy as hell. Blair Adams runs across 2 countries before getting murdered in the most bizarre way imaginable. A man named Blair Adams was an average 31-year-old Canadian construction worker who on July the 5th, 1996, suddenly withdrew all the money in his bank account, emptied his safe and deposit box, and grabbed everything of any value from his home that he could fit in his pockets, and made a beeline for the US border. But unfortunately for Adams, it turns out that the US Border Patrol tends to be suspicious of young men trying to enter America alone, with giant suitcases full of money, even from the Canadian side, so he was turned away. The next day, Adams quit his job and bought a plane ticket to Germany, and then immediately changed his mind and got a refund on the ticket. He then showed up at a friend's house, insisting that someone wanted to kill him. He begged his friend to smuggle him into America, but when she refused, Adam got a rental car and tried again to cross the border. This time, he got through though, and once he was in Seattle, he bought a plane ticket to Washington DC and then drove to Knoxville. This is a less sightseeing route and more like a path of a man who is desperately trying to lose something that he thinks is chasing him. But maybe he was just paranoid. But once he was in Tennessee, witnesses reported that Adams entered a gas station and complained that his car wouldn't start. The attendant investigated and found that Adam had the wrong keys, even though he'd obviously managed to drive the car to the gas station somehow. He then hitchhiked to a hotel, paid for a room, but never went to it. After handing over the money, he immediately left the hotel and never came back. But hours later, his body was found in a car park half a mile from the hotel. His trousers and underwear had been forcibly removed, and the cause of death was found to be a single punch to the stomach, so powerful that it ruptured his internal organs. But that's it. That's all anyone knows. To this day, nobody can explain who Blair Adams thought was after him, or who challenged this Canadian man. If you know any more information about this case, let me know in the comments. A retired police officer uncovers a 30-year-old recording from his son's probable killer. On January the 12th, 1984, 7-year-old Gary Grant Jr., the son of a New Jersey police detective, left his Atlantic City home and told his mother he had an appointment with someone. But given that 7-year-olds aren't exactly known for their business awareness, his mother thought that was pretty strange, but figured her kid was being silly and let him out to play with his friends. Although, he never came back. After 2 days later, he was found, battered to death with a metal pipe. The investigation turned to Gary's 12-year-old friend, Carl Boo Mason, who was reportedly the last person to have seen Gary alive. After being interrogated, Boo admitted to have killed Gary, and he was arrested for the crime. But this is all incredibly depressing, but highly mysterious, as you've seen stuff like this on the news before. Even kids can kill. The only problem was that Boo was mentally challenged, and he would have admitted to killing JFK if he was asked that question. The admission was ruled inadmissible. Boo was released, and the police were left without a lead, until 2 years later, when someone wrote a seeming confession on the side of a patrol car. It read, "Gary Grant's dead, I am living. Another will die on January the 12th, if all goes right." But thankfully, it looked like all did not go right, because nobody was actually killed on January the 12th, as far as anyone is aware. But instead, another message was written on a pavement saying, "Gary Grant Jr. lives. I still killed him. Son of a pig officer. Payback is a motherfucker." They never tracked down whoever was leaving the messages, and the case went cold for over 30 years. So was the graffiti a clue, or a hoax, for some person trying to taunt the father of the victim? But nearly 3 decades later, in December 2015, the now retired Gary Grant was going through a bunch of old evidence when he came across an audio recording from 1986. It was a mystery caller admitting responsibility for Gary's murder to the police dispatcher, which for some reason was never pursued as a lead. But what do you think? Take a listen.
Police and fire.
Yes. Is it possible for me to collect the reward on my own self for the murder of Gary Grant? No, well, how's if I did it myself and I want to collect the own reward?
If you did it?
Yeah.
Well, suppose I hook you into the Detective Bureau.
No, it's okay.
I mean, that's only you.
Make sure they know that's not a crank call. You'll never be able to catch him.
Of course, it could have been a prankster, as this call took place on March the 8th, which would have been Gary's 10th birthday, and it occurred around the same time as those cryptic messages appeared on the police car and pavement. But unfortunately, due to the police's cunning investigative technique of stashing an incriminating recording in the box for over 3 decades, we'll probably never know what actually happened. A woman disappears from a Disney cruise ship, but there are hints of a bizarre cover-up. A British citizen, Rebecca Khorium, worked as a youth activities coordinator aboard the Disney cruise ship Wonder, which sounds like the happiest job in the world. But Rebecca was seen on a security video having a distressing phone conversation on the morning of March the 22nd, 2011, before leaving her quarters. And that's the last time anyone ever saw her. She didn't show up for work that day and couldn't be located after the ship's wide search. That means she went overboard. Though a Coast Guard search of the surrounding waters didn't even find a body. But to understand why it's a pain to find the truth about anything that happens on a cruise ship, you have to understand the weird legal grey area in which these vessels float. The investigation into Rebecca's disappearance was assigned to a single police officer in Nassau, in the Bahamas, because that's where the ship is registered for transparently nefarious purposes, which include avoiding certain taxes and safety regulations. But the officer spent exactly 1 day on the ship before heading back to the Bahamas and never following up on the disappearance ever again. But the official story was that Rebecca was near a railing when a rogue wave hit the ship, sending her toppling overboard. But also note, there was never any evidence or testimony that a rogue wave hit the boat that day. In November of 2011, journalist John Ronson boarded the Wonder to get to the bottom of this, and immediately found everyone acting suspicious. Some of the Disney crew members swore Rebecca's disappearance never happened at all, because that's the answer they had to give. Other crew members recited that the story of a visibly upset Rebecca going to a private crew-only pool on the deck and intentionally climbing overboard. But Disney even said they found one of her sandals by the pool, which seemed to confirm this theory, except for the fact that one of Rebecca's close friends insists that she never wore a pair of sandals like that in the entire time she was on the ship. So, why would the cruise line lie about that? Another one of her friends insists that Disney higher-ups place a bouquet of flowers by the crew pool after her disappearance without any explanation, which suggests that they either knew she fell overboard at that spot or wanted people to believe she did. But here's the thing, the vast majority of the crew seem to be in agreement that somewhere, someone within Disney knows exactly what happened, simply because virtually every square inch of the ship is monitored by security cameras, including the spot of Rebecca's alleged suicide. Members of the British Parliament have pushed for answers, suggesting that the truth is something Disney doesn't want out there, such as that Rebecca was sexually assaulted, as she was last seen wearing oversized clothes that weren't her own, and then murdered. But Disney insists there is no video, and in fact won't even disclose the locations of the security cameras. But obviously, nobody is saying Disney is going around having people killed. But if the young woman was the victim of something like that, it would put Disney Cruises in the headlines for all the wrong reasons. So what do you think happened? If you have any other theories about this, let me know in the comments. A man dies of an alleged overdose, and his parents receive a creepy, mysterious letter. In 2011, a Chilliwack, British Columbia man named Sherby was found dead in his home. He was discovered on his knees in front of a sofa, his face pressed down into the cushion. There was a pool of black fluid surrounding him, which looked like dried blood. In the absence of foul play, police ruled that Corey's likely cause of death was acute combined cocaine and ethanol intoxication. They said there was no signs of trauma, and it was the natural result of the body purging its fluids after death. But Corey's parents found this unlikely, stating that Khori didn't do any drugs at all, to the extent that he never so much took an aspirin. But that's what everyone's parents say. But Corey's parents also claim they found bloody footprints, which appeared to be a woman's, throughout the house. And a bloody handprint was found on his wallet, from which all the cash was missing. Also, a mysterious woman was supposedly seen at the apartment a few days earlier, who has not been identified to this day. And there was a cardboard box in front of the hall, scrawled with the words, "Better be a funeral." The police say all that can be explained, and they say that the bloody footprints weren't there when they arrived, and were probably the result of somebody being sloppy at the crime scene. And it's easy to imagine that these are simply parents in denial. There were no further leads indicating any crime, and the case remained cold for the next 3 years. But in 2014, Corey's parents received a mysterious letter, which appears to have been written on some kind of old-time typewriter, and it read, "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Sherby, Shakespeare said, 'Hell hath no fury, than a woman scorned.' That's the kind of homicide it was, a scorned woman. Those who know it was, belong to a tight group to say a word. I think your son Khori decided too late to back off, and it jeopardized his well-being. Sincerely, a reader of the Chilliwack Times." But part of that sounds like a person who heard about the case in the papers, and a part of it sounds like they had inside information. But then a friend of Corey's, named Tammy Burden, contacted his parents claiming that she knew Corey had been murdered over a drug deal, but she couldn't say who did it, or else she would be next. But maybe she was the person that wrote that letter. People could have asked her, but a few months later, she cut her finger and died of blood poisoning. But to this day, Corey's death is still officially an overdose. But maybe it was. Although, if it's true, it's pretty horrifying on its own. A college freshman vanishes from his room and is never seen again. On the night of December the 10th, 1999, Michael Negrete attended a party at his UCLA dorm, then went and played computer games with a friend until 4 a.m. And then he went into the hall to high-five his opponent before calmly re-entering his room and apparently disappearing forever. By all accounts, Negrete was a well-adjusted kid with no history of depression or drug use. He had good grades and was attending UCLA on a music scholarship. But also, all of his belongings, including his wallet, shoes and keys, were all still in his room, completely undisturbed. After Negrete's roommate reported his disappearance the next morning, a bloodhound traced Negrete scent to a bus stop a few miles away, where the trail went suddenly cold. However, investigators were unable to answer why Negrete would have suddenly decided to catch a bus at 4 in the morning without saying a word to anyone, or even why the driver would have let him on board without a wallet or shoes. But the only other lead came from an unidentified man in his mid-30s who was spotted in Negrete's dorm that night, wearing a shiny grey jacket with a turquoise-coloured design. Now, a man in his 30s creeping around a college dorm at 4 a.m. while dressed as a rollerblade is pretty suspicious, but police were never able to track him down. But that's it. It's been 17 years of absolutely nothing. If Negrete spontaneously ran away to start a new life, he did it without money. He never tried to access his bank accounts or even contact family or friends. If he sleepwalked into a fatal accident on the UCLA campus or spontaneously decided to commit suicide, surely a body would have turned up. Also, he couldn't have gotten far with no transportation and no shoes, so that would seem to leave murder as the only remaining possibility. But if Negrete had enemies or a secret life, no one had ever seen the slightest hint of it. Even if he was abducted from the dorm by force, no one heard or saw anything, and no evidence of the struggle or a break-in was left behind. But all we have, the kid played some games, said goodnight to his friend, headed to his dorm, then disappeared into thin air. Zero witnesses, then or after. No corpse, no credible tips, no physical evidence tossed in the bin. But nobody is saying they picked up a hitchhiker in pajamas. Nothing. And it's not like he went missing in 19th century London, when records were sloppy, nobody owned cameras, and common people could disappear by moving 2 houses away. So what's your thoughts about this case?